One cool November evening in the year 2005, I sat hunched before a small 13-inch television nestled in the corner of a small Tokyo apartment. Controller in hand, I peered out across a vast, sun-soaked landscape with just one last foe to vanquish. Victory would soon arrive, and this experience would remain a vivid memory for years to come. For myself and many others, Shadow of the Colossus is the type of experience so strong that it can strengthen one's love of the medium as a whole. This is a very special game, and to revive such a classic in the modern age requires a team as passionate and caring as the fans which hold it so dear. This is exactly the path which Sony has taken by employing the masters of the remaster, Bluepoint Games. Time and again, Bluepoint has delivered tremendous remasters of beloved classics, but with the release of Shadow of the Colossus for PlayStation 4, we're looking at something new. A full-on, from-the-ground-up remake of the original game. And over the course of this video, we're going to look at just what Bluepoint has created with this latest title, while drawing many direct comparisons with prior releases, including its own previous remaster on PlayStation 3. Could this be the greatest remake of all time? The journey to answer this question begins now. Shadow of the Colossus on PlayStation 2 is a technical and artistic achievement. It's a game I've examined closely in a previous episode of DF Retro, and this brand new take on the game manages to stand out as its very own technical showpiece. In reimagining the game for PlayStation 4, Bluepoint had to push itself to the next level. Most of its previous projects involved translating existing games to new platforms, and while some received minor touch-ups along the way, Shadow of the Colossus marks the first time the team has completely recreated everything from scratch. With a new in-house art team at its disposal then, Bluepoint's vision of Shadow of the Colossus combines fresh art assets with a powerful new engine to create one of the most beautiful games of the generation. Great care has been placed into rebuilding the experience. The sense of scale so critical to the original has been maintained and expanded upon. The world itself feels as vast as ever, but with more powerful hardware, the team was able to greatly expand detail displayed far off into the distance. On PlayStation 2, an aggressive streaming system was used to enable seamless traversal, but pulling this off requires the use of flat two-dimensional imagery in the distance. It gives the impression of a large world without drawing all the necessary geometry, saving on processing power. It's basically an extremely aggressive LOD system, and it worked. But on PlayStation 4, LODs are implemented in a more modern fashion. Things like foliage can be seen drawing into view, but most of the world geometry appears highly detailed even when viewed from all the way across the map, which just looks fantastic in motion. Everything from the richly detailed valley walls to the gorgeous stonework of the central temple has been completely reworked and remade. This is one of the riskiest parts of the project, however, as recreating the environments of such a classic experience could have impacted the atmosphere the development team worked so hard to create in the first place. Once you sit down and begin to play this remake, however, it feels natural, like a natural evolution of what Ueda's team envisioned in the first place. In addition, a new lighting engine further enhances the atmosphere while exhibiting its own unique flavor. This rich new lighting changes the look of the game in many ways, but it still manages to retain the basic design language so evident in the original artwork. Of course, one neat feature included in this remake are these adjustable filters. While the default is recommended for an initial playthrough, of course, it is possible to play with the overall look of the game by selecting one of the available filters and adjusting the intensity. You can even turn on film grain if you like. It's a small feature on its own, but surprisingly effective. Beyond the geometry itself, the world now features gorgeous shadow maps which cast out across the environment, adding real depth to each scene, something that was impossible in the original game. On top of this, a rich volumetric lighting solution is used throughout the adventure now, from the rays of light piercing through the dusty temples to the sun shafts slicing across the canyon floors. The addition of volumetric lighting feels like a natural extension of what the original developers had first envisioned. On PlayStation 2, this effect was simulated in many scenes by using two-dimensional elements, but on PlayStation 4 it feels far more rich. New life is also breathed into these environments thanks to a new foliage system which allows for thick fields of grass and richly detailed forests, complete with leaves that now blow gently in the breeze. As the player moves through this foliage, branches and blades of grass alike are now displaced in your wake, further increasing the immersion. Water is treated similarly as well. On PlayStation 2, without the aid of modern programmable shaders, the team had to rely on interesting tricks to create convincing bodies of water. The environment and characters alike could be blurred beneath the surface. Mesh-based waves were used to add depth in many scenes, and a smoothly animated surface texture tops things off. On PS4, a rich water surface shader is now used along with simple base reflections and the full screen space variety. What's impressive here is the distance at which SSR is used. Even from this cliffside, the reflections subtly reflect across the surface of the water in a very realistic fashion. And when the reflectors are occluded from view, the transitions feel far less jarring than we've seen in other games. On top of this, while swimming in pools of water, a nice ripple effect is used, and each circular ripple interacts realistically with other ripples. There's even mesh-based surface disturbances used in many scenes. It's visible both in heavy action scenes such as this, but also in quieter scenes like this. It really adds a lot to the presentation. The last major piece of the environment puzzle then is the sky. The original game simulates the appearance of high dynamic range lighting, a miracle for the PS2 hardware, but its signature look is tied to the appearance of bright, light-piercing holes through the clouds. The strong bloom component lends the game a unique appearance, which is common to games produced by Ueda. For this remake, Bluepoint has made certain to recreate this aspect of the design with a new, more realistic cloud layer. Light is still seen penetrating holes within the sky in a fashion similar to the original game. The same overbright glare of the sky is maintained beautifully in this remake. Even better, this remake supports modern, display-based HDR, allowing these bright spots to pop in a way that the original game never could. There are even cloud shadows present across the environment, bringing further depth to the overall presentation. It's also worth mentioning the excellent texture work found throughout the game. All the artwork needed to be recreated for this project, and it looks superb. Parallax occlusion maps are combined with actual geometry and new textures to help give the world a coating of fine detail that was lacking in its original form. What's really great about the new artwork though is how closely it maintains the look and feel of a Team Ico game. The added resolution means it resembles The Last Guardian more than Shadow of the Colossus, of course, but it does feel just right within this game world. The next major upgrade can be found in motion. The animation has been recreated entirely from scratch, enabling more natural motion while still recalling the look and feel of the original game. One of the major innovations featured in Shadow of the Colossus is the reliance on real-time inverse kinematics calculations. This technique allows models to more realistically interact with surfaces by properly connecting with all manner of slopes and edges. This is key both to terrain navigation and, more importantly, the Colossus battles. The combination of fluid animation and real-time IK enables the game to present animation that was very uncommon and highly impressive for its day. With the PS4 remake of the game then, Bluepoint has created the animation from scratch, while using the additional processing power of the PS4 to improve IK calculations. As a result, Wander's feet more realistically connect with the terrain, and Colossus battles feel much more natural as well. There's a newfound fluidity to everything that greatly enhances the experience of playing Shadow of the Colossus. This is of course further aided by a new physics system applied to everything from Wander's poncho, the trinkets adorning his belt, Agro's tail, and the bits attached to each of the colossi. This new weighted physics system greatly improves the perception of motion during gameplay and adds weight to every movement. And all of this is enhanced by a robust post-processing pipeline, including a rich depth of field system and, more importantly, per-object motion blur. Now, the original PS2 release is well known for its impressive attempt at simulating this effect on a system that wasn't really capable of per-pixel motion blur at all. This was then improved in the initial remaster of the game on PlayStation 3 with a proper per pixel blur applied across the scene. On PlayStation 4, however, the sample count and precision of the effect is greatly increased and applied to everything. The shutter speed can even be adjusted in the options menu, allowing the effect to appear both correct and high quality in both visual modes on the PlayStation 4 Pro. Looking at the overall package then, it's remarkable how dramatic an overhaul we're looking at here. Bluepoint's engine enables some truly breathtaking moments and gloriously detailed scenes. If we stop for a second and consider that, at least on the PS4 Pro, we're looking at this massive, beautifully lit world with super high quality post-processing running at 60 frames per second. We've seen this kind of performance in games like Metal Gear Solid 5, of course, but it's rare to find a game of this scale operating at such a smooth frame rate. It's true that the world is mostly empty, and this no doubt helps keep the performance up, but I was genuinely floored by the experience of playing a game this nice looking at 60 frames per second on a console. And all of this is topped off with a brand new control scheme with refined controls, which makes the execution of moves much easier than in prior releases. Input latency is also greatly reduced compared to the original or, say, The Last Guardian, and the high frame rate mode on PS4 Pro allows for a responsiveness approaching a dedicated action game. Despite this, it still manages to feel suitably weighty and faithful to the original release. It's a perfect balance of responsiveness and weightiness. This of course brings us to the differences between playing the game on the two available PlayStation 4 models. Shadow of the Colossus features robust support for the PlayStation 4 Pro, while also running nicely on a standard system. When booting the game on a Pro, you have the choice between a higher resolution 1440p mode capped at 30 frames per second, or a high performance 60 frames per second mode at 1080p. The game supports downscaling, so both options remain available regardless of which display you might be using. And while these numbers may not seem as high as one might like, the resulting image quality greatly exceeds what you would expect. An extremely high quality temporal anti-aliasing solution has been devised, enabling very clean edges across every scene with minimal shimmering. Everything from the stone edges to foliage is covered by this excellent AA implementation, and it looks superb. On the standard PlayStation 4 then, the resolution is set to a native 1080p at 30 frames per second, and once again, the excellent TAA saves the day. In all three cases, this is an upgrade from both the original PS2 game, which is just 512 by 448, and the PS3 remaster, which renders at 960 by 1080 with horizontally stretched pixels. The difference between these three releases of the game are significant, both in terms of visual quality and image quality. In terms of differences between the PS4 and the Pro, this appears to come down to resolution and frame rate options. Speaking of frame rate, how about the performance? This is perhaps the area that was always in most need of improvement. After all, the game runs very slowly on PlayStation 2, but even on the PS3 at 1080p, slowdown is possible. First, let's look at my preferred mode, the 60 FPS performance mode on the PS4 Pro. For the most part, we're looking at a locked 60 frames per second experience here. The stability of the frame rate combined with the excellent motion blur results in one of the smoothest feeling games I've played since Doom 2016. It's a strange comparison to make, I know, but with the post-processing and stability of the frame rate, it really does remind me of this game. It's so smooth and buttery. And this applies equally to both boss fights with the various Colossi, which was previously the most demanding aspect of the game, and while exploring the world. It's all very, very smooth. But that doesn't mean it's 100% perfect, maybe just 99%. You see, in the main tempo area, if you wander around the steps here, it's possible to trigger a handful of torn frames. Now, it is possible that other areas later in the game could also drop, but even after finishing the first 7 Colossi in the game, I've yet to encounter any other section that has this same problem. So overall then, performance is excellent in this mode, and it is my recommended way to experience the game. If you prefer a high resolution, however, the 30 FPS cinematic mode is pretty good as well. Thanks to the excellent motion blur, the game still manages to look great in motion, though naturally not quite as smooth as the performance mode. The key here, however, is stability. No matter what is happening on the screen, the performance metrics remain stable. at least based on my experience with the first few Colossi in this mode, which I replayed specifically to test it. A locked 30 FPS is nothing to sneeze at either. It's still a massive improvement over the original game. It's just that here, the choice is up to you if you're running a PS4 Pro. Now over on the base PS4 we see much the same thing, a stable 30 FPS frame rate. Visually, the base version of the game looks just like the performance mode on the Pro, but at half the frame rate, so base owners do still receive a great, beautiful looking experience all around, but clearly, if you want that best performance, the PS4 Pro is where it's at. Overall, it's really a very simple case then. All three potential ways to enjoy the game are handled very well. The option to run at 60 FPS is something we always hope for with Pro-enabled games, and it's great that Bluepoint has delivered on this promise. So looking back at what we've covered thus far, I think it's fair to say that Shadow of the Colossus does indeed stand as one of the finest remakes of all time. Is it the absolute best though? Well, that's a difficult call to make since there have been plenty of other great releases over the years as well, but I feel that this new take on Colossus stands among the absolute best. The reasons for this are simple. Firstly, there's the visual update, which is simply sublime. It's a remake, yet manages to stand as one of the most visually beautiful games of the generation, at least in my opinion. The fact that it offers a 60 FPS mode on top of that is just icing on the cake. This is a game that showcases Bluepoint at its very best, and I can't wait to see where they go from here. Secondly, there's the controls. This is a game that has always exhibited somewhat leggy, unresponsive controls, and while it's never stopped me from loving the game, I do feel that the improvements made here in this new release help make for a much more playable game all around. It just feels better, and that's a very good thing. But if you're a stickler for the original, well, the team has offered an option to play with classic controls as well, which more closely emulate the original game. Having both options in a remake certainly helps strengthen its case as one of the best. Thirdly, there's the extra features. A wonderful and capable photo mode is introduced, for instance, and works pretty well, along with these filters, which are great for replays. And finally, there's the understanding of the source material. When rebuilding a game like this, nailing the originally intended atmosphere and sensation of playing the game is very difficult. You want to create something new and modern, but at the same time you have to nail the feeling of the original release, and that's exactly what Bluepoint has done here. From the very beginning of the game, it's clear that the team has approached its design in an obsessive fashion. They truly understand Shadow of the Colossus. And at this point, you should know well if this remake is for you. Yes, it's still Shadow of the Colossus, but if you're a fan of the original game or you've never touched it in the first place, this is one of the most interesting and influential single-player games of the past 13 years. It's not for everyone, of course, but if you made it this far into the video, it might just be for you. With that though, we've reached the end of this look at the game. I know I certainly enjoyed revisiting this classic and digging deep into its features, which helped me appreciate it even more. This is a remarkable piece of work here from Bluepoint, and well worth experiencing again for the first time. That's all for now though. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, and